Due Process, honored for 3 consecutive years with the Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Outstanding Talk Program Series.
Well, I'm glad to see that you have obtained employment, and we'll see you back when, Angela?
March 1st.
Right. We'll see you back here March 1st. Good luck with your employment.
Not your usual courtroom talk, not your usual court. It's where some drug users and drug dealers go instead of going to jail. It's Drug Court, and it's what's up next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
In the last quarter of the last century, New Jersey's inmate population boomed by nearly 500%. The corrections budget swelled by an even greater margin. And if there's one word to explain it, it's drugs. I'm Raymond Brown, and in this edition of Due Process, we look at one still fledgling attempt to reverse that trend, the drug court. And we start with a look inside a different kind of courtroom. Here's Sandy.
Raymond, when we last looked into Drug Court, it was just a pilot program starting up in Camden County, long on promise, but too soon for proof. Now, 4 years later, there are drug courts in New Jersey's 5 most urban counties, and the state judiciary is calling for drug courts to be installed throughout the state at a cost, it's claimed, that could be a bargain in the long run.
I'd be out there on the streets, robbing, stealing, committing so many crimes and getting locked up. I would have to do a little time and then get out, then be back out here in the same old thing.
And Darnell insists that what made the difference was the second chance that he found in this courtroom, a chance to stay out of jail by staying straight, with the state's official blessing and oversight.
His urine today was clean. He is instructed to continue with the meetings and the curfews.
It is Thursday afternoon in Drug Court, Essex County, and Darnell is just one of a dozen defendants who are here for the weekly conversation that keeps them free on the street instead of locked up in a cell.
He's going to continue in that program, and we'll see you back here next Thursday. Thank you.
You know, it's an experiment. It's also a gamble. But it's a gamble that seems to be paying off.
Paying off for addicts like Shawnee, a mother of 3 who could have been sentenced to serve hard time if she'd found herself before a different judge in the usual punitive kind of court.
She's actively looking for her own apartment. In addition, she showed me today that she received a certificate of achievement being in the Food and Nutrition Education Program sponsored by Rutgers. She completed that program and got the certificate, and she was...
I stopped using drugs, focus on me, live life on life terms, take care of my kids a little better.
Shanique's been clean for the last 10 months, and this drug court has 10 months of urine tests to prove it. Tests that are just the beginning of what these defendants are required to put out.
Inpatient program, aftercare, curfew, pagers that's on 24 hours for, you know, any type of emergency. They realize that they have to make a minimum of three meetings a week as far as NA or AA.
12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous.
Even each court session starts with the 12 steps.
A program of recovery.
And outside of court, the monitoring is intense, beginning with a 7 p.m. enforced curfew.
They know that if they slip up, they're going to be caught. And that's because they are intensely supervised by the probation staff here.
A couple of nights a week, the probation officers get in a car together and they go out and just check on the houses and make sure that they're there.
As a rule, probation officer can drop by their house 24/7.
Yvonne Seegers is a public defender, Joe Donahue a prosecutor. That would usually make them adversaries. Instead, in yet another crucial drug court difference, they are allies.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And by the way, sometimes the prosecutor is very, is encouraging incentives, and I might be encouraging a sanction.
And when there is a sanction, the consequence for breaking the rules is jail time. Darnell has been sanctioned twice in the last 2 years, once for breaking curfew, once for using drugs. But most of the defendants we saw in court were staying on track.
And she's working another case to pay that fine, but she's doing very well.
Still, one man who asked that his face not be shown found out that the failure to follow the rules can lead even this judge to get tough.
I told you you're on trial every day, sir. Doesn't matter whether you're in this program
Let's end
1
this
year
program right now.
or 10 years. Doesn't matter.
Let's end this program.
He's going to be sanctioned, put him in, we'll have him back in court next Thursday. They have to know that if they do mess up, they're going to get punished, and that's where I come in.
It's drug court as morality play. You know, the sanctions that we work out in advance are done oftentimes not just for that person. The incentives we build into the program for that particular person are being done to show the rest of the people in the courtroom what they can expect and what's expected of them.
One thing that's expected is work, a job. So Darnell is behind this counter instead of being back on the street.
Since drug courts came in, since this program came in effect, it's like, made me a new person. And the people that's involved with it, some of them look at it like the same way I look at it. It changes their lives. It gave them a second chance of being, a productive member of society.
But advocates of drug court say you don't have to take the defendant's word for how well they work. First, there are the financial costs. It costs roughly $34,000 a year to keep an inmate in prison. About half that to treat and supervise and monitor through drug court. But proponents say it's not just about the dollars. National stats claim an even bigger gain, a dramatic reduction in those who return to drugs and, Raymond, those who return to jail.
But are the claims overstated? Is it too soon to tell? Should drug dealers get the drug court break? Is it fair to give them treatment when other addicts in need get turned away? Those questions and more when we come back, so stay with us.
Well, I think sending them to jail is not helping them, not if they're addicted to drugs.
Programs, rehab, but it's something that they got to be made to do, though. And they got to want to do it. Sometimes, they don't want to do it. Addiction is rough.
They don't need to go to jail. That doesn't help anyone because then they just come out and they're more angry than they were before and they're not any less likely to use drugs.
If you get them off the drugs, then they won't be out there selling them. Most of them selling it for a habit.
They should go to jail if they're out here selling drugs. There is help for them. If they want, they need willpower.
Most of the time they go to jail, come out, do the same thing over to get the drugs and go back to jail. And it's a vicious cycle. So, yeah, we got to come up with some better ideas other than jail.
And something other than jail is what drug court offers, not only for drug users, but for drug dealers, too, if they're addicted. Leah McGarry Morris, an assistant public defender, has authored an extensive study of the New Jersey drug courts for Leadership New Jersey. She's here to tell us that they work. And Dave Kerr, who's with us from Newark, where he runs the state's largest residential drug rehabilitation program, agrees, but he's concerned about non-drug court participants he's forced to turn away. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Leah, you and I have known each other for many years from the context of criminal defense work. So it has never surprised me that you were an advocate in favor of drug courts and have been very much instrumental in developing their use in New Jersey. But we thought you needed somebody on the other side of the question, and we looked high and low. And despite the fact that the war on drugs is still the national drug strategy and to some extent still prevalent in New Jersey, and that there are legislators who consistently vote for higher criminal penalties for many offenses, including drug offenses, we couldn't find anybody to come here and openly criticize drug courts. Is that because there's genuinely and almost across-the-board belief that this is something that works?
I'm sure it isn't because of that, but it may be that everybody that you've asked either doesn't know about drug courts, or if they do know about drug courts, they become convinced. It has been our experience that most people who actually educate themselves and visit drug courts and really think and listen to what they're all about become convinced that it's a really valuable approach.
Okay. The reason I asked that question was that if there was a strong consensus, and it does seem to be a pretty large consensus stretching across political boundaries, that this is an idea that can save money and maybe produce some human savings. But on the other hand, speaking of money, it seems to me that there are problems. Even if I look at your report starts with some recommendations, and the first one seems to say, legislature, we really need more money to fully fund treatment. So that would suggest a sort of a disconnect between people who generally say this works, but not enough strength politically and in the legislature to adequately fund it.
Well, you're right. One of the problems, I think, is that you have to think about the reallocation of resources rather than the notion of piling up a whole bunch of extra dollars on top of a pre-existing program. What drug court and courts like drug courts do is they approach the whole notion of criminal justice and the outcomes that we're looking for in a different way. It costs money, there's no question about it. If you're only looking at it from a cost factor, however, it costs less. But what's more interesting to me is that drug court, much more than the traditional criminal justice approach, actually brokers change in this particular population.
If there is the kind of savings you talk about, then the question would arise, why isn't it possible for the legislature to take the view that while it may require some movement or even some initial investment, in the long run it's going to be a fiscal benefit as well as a social, political, and community benefit? How long do you think it's going to take for the legislature to catch up and to decide to put the necessary resources in?
Well, I've never been a legislator, Ray, and I don't pretend to understand all of the factors that impel their ideas and thoughts, and it wouldn't be right for me to criticize them. But I would say this. I think that legislators, of course, are interested in pleasing the public, which means being electable, but also means doing a good job on issues that they think the public cares about. I think that a lot of the reluctance to embrace drug courts has to do with a lack of understanding that they're actually a much better solution to many of these serious issues that confront us. So it may well be that if legislators actually understood how drug courts really existentially operate, they would have a very different reaction. I really think it's a question of education.
Okay. And let me turn to somebody who's a master of existentialism, Dave Kehr, and ask you about some other kinds of costs. One of the issues that I think is part of the backdrop to this is that there have to be people who say, if we're going to spend resources on drug treatment, what about taking young folks, for example, who've not committed or been convicted of or even arrested for a crime, who may have a drug addiction problem? We don't have room to treat them. Is that part of the mix here?
That seems to be part of the mix. I'm not, I'm a strong proponent for drug courts. The drug court, one of the reasons it works so well is it gives the addict in treatment positive sanctions for doing well, rather than just waiting till the traditional criminal justice system, waiting till the addict fails or gets back a dirty urine and then return him back to the prison. The drug court system capitalizes on the successes that the addict client makes in treatment, and it kind of boosts the process in a positive way, and the treatment programs appreciate that. The other thing the drug court does is keeps the client in treatment for at least 6 months, and then it has dollars after treatment for an aftercare, continuing care program. One thing should be clear, though, the drug court dollars are not going, for the most part, into treatment. They're going into the courts. And so you're right again, where the treatment agencies, I agree with Leah, do need a different funnel of funding to keep up with the demand for treatment, because we are turning away hundreds of people who never committed crimes because the funding is for people who did commit crimes.
Leah, let me come back to this because it's a political question, but it's an important one.
It's
and it has other aspects of the criminal justice system, like Pell Grants and other areas where people say, well, why are you devoting resources to those people who've committed crimes, have been charged with crime, when there are people over here with the same problem who haven't been involved in antisocial behavior? How do you address that question, which is not one that can be dismissed?
I wouldn't dismiss it. I think the public has a real interest in seeing treatment on demand in New Jersey for everybody who wants it. We do not have that. The statistics that I've been acquainted with tell me that there's a very small proportion of treatment beds available for everybody who really needs it. So one of the questions here obviously is, well, then why focus on this population? And I think the reason is because what this population does to the quality of life for everybody else is significant. And if you can stop drug-driven criminality, you're going to significantly reduce the kind of criminality that really causes a lot of anger, frustration, grief, sadness, and difficulty in society.
So you're saying it's not either or, we really have to look at both?
Absolutely.
Dave, not to stay on numbers, but let me ask you broadly, how many people does your program and others like it turn away across the board who would benefit from some kind of treatment, but for whom there are not adequate resources?
Well, we don't really turn them away, but what we do is we put them on a waiting list, and we have them call in twice a week. We also have an option.
How long is your waiting list typically?
The waiting list is hundreds of people, over 300 people, and it lasts anywhere from 2 to 6 months, depending. We have.
And let me ask you, I don't want to run by that because that may seem like small numbers, but those are large numbers. And is it also true that you may have attrition, that is some people who are ready today, but by the time you get to them may not be ready if they're there on a voluntary basis?
That's very true. The thing you should understand as well is there are people sitting in jail waiting for a bed to open up, costing the taxpayer more money to sit in jail than it would be to treat that person.
Now, let me get away from dollars and even numbers for the moment and ask you a question that I think might be on folks' minds, and that is that there was a concept, for example, perhaps a family has an alcoholic in the family, and the idea is unless he or she hits bottom and decides they want treatment, there's nothing you can do. In the context certainly of the drug court, there's an element openly talked about of coercion, of pressure. Does that make a difference to treatment? Does the person who comes in voluntarily respond to the same treatment in the same way that a person who's sent essentially because the choice is that or jail?
There's been research on that, and the research shows, and my own observations show, that people who are committed through a drug court can become motivated. They may not be motivated for the right reasons initially, but eventually they acquire enough concepts to realize that they want to continue with the program.
Let me press that a little bit, Dave, because I think there's maybe a lag that you're talking about. Is there a difference in success rate? However you measure success, do you have the same percentage of people who receive treatment on a coercive basis as opposed to a voluntary basis who then never seem to seek treatment again and seem to stay drug-free?
I can tell you the success rate of drug court referrals is higher than any other referral we get. And we have probationers, parolees, federal probation, we have inmates, we have and volunteers. And drug court has the highest rate of retaining and success.
Okay. Leah, what is your thought about that?
I'd like to comment on that. I think this is very important. What we've learned, I'm sure Dave would agree, that the most successful addiction treatment is long-term. The longer statistically you stay in treatment, apparently, from everything I've read and everything I've heard, and again, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, the more success people have staying in recovery. What drug court does is a really unique blend of using the criminal justice system and the therapeutic system to be partners in the sense that it keeps people in treatment long enough for genuine transformation to take place. And that's, I think, there are many interesting aspects of drug court, but that's the key aspect.
So do I take from this discussion that longevity and continued involvement in treatment is perhaps more important than the motive you had on the first day you went?
I think that's absolutely true. Although I'm not a fan of coerced treatment, I will tell you that what we've found, and I think you'll see the trend more and more in this direction, is that the people who have the most to lose, typically people who are facing prison or treatment, are motivated to start. And what drug court does is it keeps them through a series of sanctions in treatment long enough for real change to take place.
Now, let me ask you to put your criminal defense hat back on for a moment, as opposed to your servant of the court system hat. We both know Yvonne Seegers, who is a public defender, well known, who was in Sandy's report. And she says, as a defense lawyer, sometimes the prosecutor is recommending sanction, sometimes I'm recommending sanction. Now, it strikes me that the normal view of the criminal defense system is that the defense lawyer, no matter what, is fighting for the client, in the sense of resisting anything that suggests a sanction, and the prosecutor has the opposite brief sometimes. But that seems to be a little different dynamic she's describing.
It's very interesting, and I've been in the same position that Yvonne has been in also, to the surprise of many at times. What drug court does is it also changes the way the institutional participants focus on the task. If you take a longer view, if you think about helping a client, you have to balance what kinds of demands are going to be on your client versus the ultimate benefit that may flow. What we have done typically from the defense point of view is say, we will recommend this to our clients and in fact support the program, in fact help make it happen, if what our clients are asked to do has a long-term benefit that matters. And it is a means-end kind of argument. The other thing that happens, which is very interesting in a drug court, is that there is a team approach and a consensus approach where you have around the table all the institutional participants, by which I mean defense, prosecution, the court, the treatment community, probation, and beyond. And everybody together is working to come up with a consensus decision of the overall way it should operate, and also every single week what the best move is to make with the individual client. You get tremendous brainstorming and a wonderful loop of experience that develops in this kind of a context. And so when we all have been doing this for a long time, we all know instinctively, because we've learned what works and what doesn't, when it might be good this week to impose a sanction or to give a benefit to someone who's participating.
There still has to be a challenge for a defense lawyer to recommend, however briefly, some period in jail for their client.
It's an interesting process.
Okay. Dave, let me ask you this. I know that you're not here to criticize the legislature or the drug court system, but let me ask you this. If you were emperor, they like to use the term drug czar, if you were in charge of the process tomorrow, what changes would you make, if any, in terms of our capacity to treat a larger number of people who are addicted, including but not limited to those who are convicted of a drug offense?
Well, first off, you have to have a statewide drug strategy, and really we can in this state because we have so many disparate departments and agencies working on the drug problem, whether it be corrections or health or education or
so Dave, how do we go, are you saying that you need new legislation or reorganization or what is it that required to make that happen?
My recommendation is the model is, for example, Florida has a drug control office, and a fellow by the name of Jim McDonough is the head of that office. I've done some research in their Florida Drug Czar concept, and it seems to have brought a lot more coordination into the Florida drug treatment strategy, from prevention on through treatment.
And what kind of powers does this person have? Does this person have the power to reallocate money, resources?
Well, a drug czar of the state of New Jersey would have the ability to see the problem overall, whereas each one of our Department of Corrections or Health or whatever see their issue. And what you really need, because drugs is a very complicated biopsychosocial problem, it's involved with our culture, and you can't just, drug courts, what I was going to say before we get too enthusiastic, drug courts are what I would call a great start, but and because you need something to hold an addict's attention. A drug addict will go with what he can get, and he will take advantage of the system. And the drug court cuts that out and closes that door. But we're a long way off. One of the things I would do is, if I were in charge of things, is I would encourage the strategy of continuing care. Particularly, you got to look at, for example, a young woman leaving treatment. She needs child care. She needs drug-free housing. She needs transportation.
Okay, Dave, let me just cut you short because we're down to 1 minute. And I know you and Leah have scrupulously avoided casting yourselves as political experts, but we've got a gubernatorial election coming up. Is there going to be discussion, for example, of the need to have a drug czar or greater coordination or a broad strategy for drugs, or are we going to be subject to the same kind of what I will call political gobbledygook when it comes to talking about drugs and crime and treatment?
Ray, we are exactly planning that. We have a symposium on the agenda for October, which will discuss these issues prior to the election, and hopefully we can get some good opinions back and forth on this.
So I can call you an optimist. Leah, full funding possible, so that you and Dave would both say, we got enough money, now let's just coordinate it?
With full education, I certainly hope so.
Okay, but is that something that we can anticipate in the near future?
I'm really not able to answer that question, but I would say this. I challenge anybody who wants to take a position about drug courts to visit one first. And then I think if that happens, we'll get full cooperation.
Okay, well, Leah and Dave, it's been really good having you with us, but it sounds to me as though we're going to have to revisit this issue because this is just the start and an important one. That's it for this edition of Due Process.
Thanks a lot.
But we'll be back next week with another important issue of law and social justice. Until then, for Sandy King and for all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Coming here, I know it helped my life much better. You know, I don't see things, you know, negativity no more. I'm looking forward to positive things now. And I think jail, I just would have, you know, did that and maybe had some regret.
A lot of people look down on us. No matter what color race, they look down on you. You know what I'm saying? They don't want to give you, you know what I'm saying, a hand when you ask for it. They want to, you get high or, you know, you might end up breaking somebody's house or, you know. But like I said, drug court came into effect. It changed a lot of people's lives here in the United States.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,